Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tammie Cumming, and I'm one of the co-hosts of our Web Bite series. And today we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion from this perspective of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education. I serve as the Associate Provost for Brooklyn College at the City University of New York, and I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. David Miller.
Hi, I'm David Miller, and I'm a professor of research and evaluation methods at the University of Florida. I'm also the director of the School of Human Development and Organizational Studies in Education. And I am pleased today that we have with us Paulette Granberry Russell, who is the president of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education.
Good morning. And thank you for the kind introduction. As you stated, I am the president of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, which is typically referred to as NADOHE. So thank you for the invitation. I sincerely appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, if you could just tell our viewers a little bit about NADOHE so that if they're unfamiliar with the work that you've been doing, which is incredible. We've had an opportunity to go to your conference and it's absolutely outstanding. But I thought we might start off a little conversation about what you've been doing and the great work.
Oh, appreciate it. So just a little bit of the history of the organization. So we refer to ourselves as the preeminent voice for chief diversity officers in higher education. Our primary mission is to lead the national as well as international conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion in post-secondary education, higher ed. Ultimately, our mission includes investigating, influencing, innovating efforts to transform higher education so that inclusive excellence basically thrives at the core of each institution, both nationally, but also globally. And when I say globally, NADOHE has existed, we became incorporated in 2007. So we're a fairly young national organization, but we have grown significantly from when we started with 80 members to over 1,600, which includes close to 400 institutional members. Our numbers grew 60% over a 2-year period. And if I were to say between that period of 2020 and 2022, you might understand what might have been part of the impetus for such a growth over that period of time. And a lot of that obviously had to do with what is typically referred to as the racial reckoning in this country. But we are a membership organization designed for diversity professionals. That includes not only senior diversity officers, but other diversity practitioners, as well as scholars and researchers. As I mentioned, we have over 1,600 members, but that also includes over 14 chapters, both state as well as regional chapters here in the U.S. And we do have 3 international members, including institutional members, Leiden in the Netherlands, as well as Coventry University in the United Kingdom. So, and we had our first international conference in September of 2022. So we're growing. We provide our memberships a range of supports, including some that I might very well refer to in answer to some questions. But it's an organization that basically is intended to support our memberships who lead and influence DEI in higher education.
Such important work, and the racial reckoning, as you referred it to. I mean, I think people really started to take notice. I mean, there's been a lot of chatter, a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion for years, but now I think we're starting to see some more movement, I should say. And recently, actually, within that racial reckoning, the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, or CHEA, has a new standard now, and it definitely addresses in its own standard directly diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do you think that the impact will be now that the accreditors are taking notice as well and following your lead?
Our hope is that it can lead to more meaningful change. And when I talk about more meaningful change, I mean it in those three contexts that it's often highlighted with respect to significant change in diversity, broadly defined, and given the kind of contextual sensitivity that diversity requires, which includes intersecting identities, that we extend our work and our efforts beyond, but necessarily including race and ethnicity, but certainly beyond that. That includes the diversity of values, both with respect to ways in which people live their lives in this country as well as outside this country, acknowledging cultural differences. But then we talk about creating a more equitable environment. So our hope is that as a result of both CHEA with respect to the role it's playing in this, I want to call it hopefully a more sustained movement to increase equity within higher education. We're very committed and supportive of that as a goal to achieve what basically is a more inclusive higher education. So we're gratified, but quite frankly, cautious, because it's not the first time that institutions in higher education have stated this commitment, that they've incorporated DEI, as it is often referred to, in their values and incorporated in their mission. So, cautious optimism.
Great.
Thank you. Sounds like you've got a lot of work that you're doing there that's very important and very central to what the universities are doing. I've someone who comes from a long background of assessment, and in fact, much of my work began in the areas of fairness in assessment and issues like that. But we also recently, Tammie and I have become very involved in trying to sort of help in the assessment of DEI and the initiatives that are going on at universities and colleges. And so we were just sort of wondering, from a diversity officer's perspective, what is the role exactly of assessment to you for diversity, equity, and inclusion change?
Thank you for a great question, and I'm looking forward to answering it, because when I think about assessment, when I think about accreditation, and both that being central to, quite frankly, what is expected of our institutions, certainly accreditation is important, and I understand the value of that, but I'm particularly interested in a more robust assessment of the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts of our institutions. And when I talk about more robust, institutions tout, as they should, the success of all students and the ways in which their efforts lead to and support the success of all students. But we recognize that that's not typically, unfortunately, for some communities, how things work. That the efforts of the past and perhaps even current efforts are not achieving the equitable outcomes that our institutions want, and certainly what our students deserve and what our faculty and staff are deserving of as well. And so our hope is that through assessment, we will do, and the institutions themselves will do, working collaboratively with the senior diversity officers that are there, as well as others who are committed to achieving more diversity, more equitable and inclusive environments. The goals. So let's talk about an interrogation, a more focused interrogation of institutional efforts to address gaps based on disaggregated data. And I know there's emphasis and there's conversations around the necessity of disaggregating data. But the question will be, to what extent are we applying and disaggregating? When we talk about disaggregated data, what does that include? Is it inclusive, we recognize, of race and ethnicity? Does that mean breaking that data down within race So that if we're talking about racial gaps, just as one example, does that include a breakdown by gender identity within race? Does that include international students? Are we disaggregating country of origin? All of those things are important. And I think, it allows us to give serious consideration to the interventions or the strategies that we're then going to apply based on disaggregated data. Because as we all know, and we all say this, and we all know this, one size does not fit all.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Being from the City University of New York, one of the colleges, we're the most diverse institution, higher ed, in the nation, actually. And we have a partnership with our chief diversity officer.
Mhm.
So I'm glad to hear you talk about that, because we are definitely, and it starts from admitting the student, even going out there recruiting the students, all the way through the graduation completion. And then as alumni, we also take a look at faculty, staff, and do a lot of gap analyses. And we really have this partnership, which I think is something wonderful that we haven't seen a lot before of in higher ed. I know you're doing a lot in at UF too, right, David?
Yes.
Yeah, we're doing some what I think are sort of some cutting edge kinds of things, especially because our provost agreed that we should put together a task force to look at assessment practices and all the ways that they're used in campus and how they inform the DEI kinds of things that we're trying to do there. And so I've co-chaired recently a task force that put together a set of standards and guidelines for fairness and equity in assessment. And it's been fascinating that the faculty, staff, administrators, students all have become involved in this initiative and have actually moved from what was initially a single set of standards to 4 sets of standards, because they thought that there were distinct and important issues that were there for students, for staff, for administration, and even for students before they become students in admissions.
That's right.
And so we've just recently completed a set of standards for looking at that our faculty, staff, and others, administrators and students are trying to think about now. The next step, of course, is now how do we make sure that we really do that seriously? And
That's
how
right.
do we pay serious attention to the work that we've begun with this?
Well, and I appreciate your point, David, particularly in the context of admissions, and we can drive that even further to pathway programs or pipeline programs, pre-college programs. And, it's not that higher ed hasn't intended to do good. It has, and it's done significantly great work in creating access to higher education for communities that have typically been unsuccessful or as successful as they would want to be in having access to higher ed. But I sometimes ask, if we go back to this point of assessment, particularly with respect to pipeline or pathway programs, are we interrogating that? Meaning, it's good work, we should be doing it, but are we paying attention to who's participating, outside of those programs that were supported by the federal government, starting way back in the early years of the War on Poverty and the TRIO programs. But, those programs did a lot of heavy lifting. But we know that we have pipeline programs that extend outside of those areas, particularly in STEM. Okay, we're seeing more progress there. But to what extent are we truly evaluating how, and again, I'm just giving focus to pre-college programs, who's accessing, who's not, who's moving through those programs and then moving into higher ed, both whether it's 2-year programs, technical colleges, technical programs, to 4-year institutions, regional to research intensive, within our HBCUs, within our tribal colleges. I mean, all of that can significantly contribute to the broader success that we hope to achieve. So I can get focused to, I go from pre-college programs to admissions to academic support to, let's talk about persistence. We can talk about graduation. We can talk about employment. All of those things, in my view, require very specific ways in which we assess student progress through higher ed.
Mhm.
I love this, as you can tell. This is work that I think as an organization and our members, and I think this is true for those of you who are outside of the role of a senior diversity officer, we're all committed to student success.
It's such an important conversation that we're having, and it's just, we're delighted that you were able to take the time and talk with us and seeing the role. Sometimes people don't see that association of the assessment and the great work that we're trying to accomplish with DEI. So it's really nice to have your perspective.
I think it's been a great thing to have you here and talking about that. It's good to see your excitement about these topics. And I think that this is a growing trend really out there, that there's just more and more people who are really finally thinking about serious use of data to make informed decisions about these kinds of important topics that you've been working on. And so we want to just thank you for spending the time today to talk with us about this.
Well, my appreciation to all of you for raising the profile of these issues, the work that you're doing. I will continue, as will NADOHE, continue the progress that's being made, the initiatives taken by CHEA, as well as the regional accrediting bodies. And I think if I could leave this conversation with perhaps one message, the more that we can do collectively to better inform those, not only the peer reviewers, but the institutional assessment offices, as well as cutting across the silos, that the importance of our working collaboratively, not only within, but across and outside of our institutions. I think the more we will be able to not only live our values, but achieve the goals that we've set for ourselves. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I appreciate it.
And we'll see you in Baltimore soon.
Yes, you will. Hey, join us.
Yes, absolutely.
And yes, it is all about, for us, dismantling barriers to equity. So please, if you can join us in Baltimore in April 2023, be there.
We'll plan on it. Thank you.